Now that we've been on the land for a little over a year and a half, we began to chart out different garden areas. One of the areas we will plant up this year is a 1-acre nut grove, which will border the 1-acre interstitial land to the east and butt up against the larger agroforestry area and the surrounding forest, which has been recently enclosed by a deer exclusion fence. This is in an area where there is already a high density of native shagbark hickories, and for which we began underplanting last year with various different species and varieties of hazelnuts, including our native hazelnuts. Now, one of the local areas that was on our list to explore was the McDaniels Nut Grove, which is located in the Cornell Botanic Gardens Upper Cascadilla Natural Area and represents an academic partnership with the horticultural section of the School of Integrative Plant Science. The 4-acre site was originally planted by horticulturalist Dr. L.H. McDaniels, who served on the Cornell faculty from 1919 through 1956. The plot was abandoned for several decades and then rediscovered by Cornell Professor Emeritus Kenneth Mudge back in 2002. Since then, he and others have revived an outdoor laboratory class to teach how permaculture overlaps with conservation, so we decided to go for a walk and check out the area with him and some other professors. You have a whole crew here. Was this a course, though?
Well, it's been a course for 15 years.
Yeah.
Until I retired, 4 years we didn't teach it, and by popular demand, we did it last fall.
That's great.
And all these guys really made it happen.
This was like the revival. It's like when the band gets back together.
Like the old guys with the band.
Yeah.
What do you think? The next thing you know, I show up, Tom shows up, and he couldn't get rid of us after that.
Oh my God, that's great.
This is a woodlot that was established in about 1920 by Lawrence McDaniels. He was a professor that joined Cornell at about that time, professor of pomology, and he actually focused mainly on apples and so forth. But he had a real interest in nut trees, temperate nut trees. He was actually, during his career, he was the first president of the Northern Nut Growers Association. And he had a fascination with nut trees, so he used this site to plant various varieties, and it was basically a nut tree variety trial. He retired in '56, and by the middle of 65 or 70, the site was abandoned and just reverted to secondary forest. I guess I rediscovered it by walking through, and in the spring, before about this time of year, before there were any leaves on the honeysuckle, which is everywhere. Yeah. So as I walked along, I could see grafted trees, and that told me, whoa, there's something going on here. And I looked into the history, and it turned out it was Lawrence McDaniels, and that's why we call it the McDaniels Nut Grove. He called it the woodlot. In about 2012 or so, we started to teach a class here, a class called Practicum in Forest Farming, and we've taught that for about 12 or so years. I retired for 4 years, didn't teach a thing, and then finally, this last fall, taught it again with the help of these 3 very able...
Not me. Those guys.
Those guys.
I'm just curious, Ken, like some of these shagbark hickories, were they here or were they planted, you think?
They were planted. This was completely deforested.
Okay.
Back in the early 20s. They cut down all the trees. I presume it was a forest like that over there. Not only did they cut down all the trees, they removed the stumps, and they used a bulldozer to completely clear the land. I have a picture of this whole area going down the hill, you'll see in a moment, with just bare earth. And I kind of figure maybe it was the first time Cornell ever had a bulldozer, and we really wanted to put it to work. But he cut some terraces into it and so forth, and then allowed trees to regenerate naturally, as well as planting trees. And from those, he grafted all these nut varieties. The way it worked was he would go to county fairs and things like that, where the farmers would bring the nuts from their, the hickory tree in their back 40, and they'd have contests, and McDaniels was the judge. And when he decided this particular farmer won the contest, he'd arranged to go out to their farm and take scions, cut off branches, which he would graft to the trees that he had planted here. And here's he's kind of a sad example of a grafted hickory. This is shagbark hickory, and this is red pignut hickory on the bottom, and you see this dramatic contrast. He was interested not only in the nut production and so forth, but the compatibility of different species with other species, this particular combination. It turns out that this is semi-incompatible. That's why that big overgrowth is there.
Even though it's in the same genus.
Same genus, two different species, right?
Yeah.
Right. Most of the trees that were grafted, like this one, if you know it's here, there is a graft union here.
Wow.
It's kind of hard to distinguish.
Yeah, that's really good.
But this is probably shagbark on shagbark.
Okay.
And we put this, look at this little piece of hook.
Yeah.
We put in there about 10 years ago, and the tree has almost completely overgrown it. He put in some labels, and very few, if any, are still around because they were completely subsumed by the growing tree.
So what was the benefit of putting shagbark on shagbark? Was he just practicing his grafting techniques, or was he?
No, well, the science, he wanted to develop clones. So that that tree of the farmer.
Had a good
you
nut.
can't root hickory from cuttings or basically any other way. The only way you could clone it would be grafting it. And the rootstock didn't really matter as far as the clone is concerned. It's just basically a rootstock, a carrier for the scion.
Right, so the rootstock, it's not like, oh, this performs best in this soil. No. It was just like, I want to clone that nut.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, apples have been highly developed by rootstock selection, and they affect the size of the tree, all those things. In the case of nut trees, there's virtually no rootstock breeding. So we're just talking mostly about seedling understocks.
And McDaniels was interested in nuts. For what reason? Like, what was his impetus or what was his drive? Do you know anything about that?
He thought that there might be a market and a demand for temperate nut trees grown in this part of the country. Mm-hmm. By the early 1930s, he had been evaluating these trees, and he pretty much decided that no, we didn't have the climate, the soils, whatever it would take to make for commercial nut production. So at that point, I wouldn't say lost interest, but it didn't, he decided what he needed to know. I mean, he figured out what he needed to do.
Do you think that's true? Do you think a lot of the nut growers would go kicking and screaming saying, hey, what about hazelnuts? I mean, you could even probably push pecans up here.
Hazelnut is probably the only one you could. Okay. Pecans are not generally hardy. You know, there's an organization called the New York Nut Growers Association, and there are a whole lot of excited people who, they do some breeding. They're all amateurs, generally speaking. Yeah. And but it's mostly backyard nut production. There is virtually no temperate nut production in New York State, with the exception of up by Batavia. There's a black walnut producer, and he's got about 100 trees, and he's doing pretty well. Is
that though because of you can't get the right kind of amount of quality of nut, or is it because we just don't have the infrastructure or the market for it, or is it a combination of?
It's a combination. As far as the facilities to deal with those nuts, Francis Woodard is his name. He has to load up his harvest every year, shell it, and then take it to Hammond Nut Company down in Columbia, Missouri. So he drives himself down there. There is no place else that will buy nuts like that.
Wow.
So that was a big limiting factor.
Okay, so this is kind of like cottage industry. If you have these in your backyard and it's a good mast year, you're in, like, we have hickory in our yard, and it was like an incredible year for hickory. I don't know if you found the same thing, but there were hickory nuts falling from the clouds, it seemed. Yeah,
there are mast years. Yeah. Probably next year you won't get very much at all.
Yeah, probably nothing at all.
Shagbark hickory is an upland species, dry soils and so forth. Shellbark is a more mesic species down on the riverbank.
It's good to know.
He did some he didn't do the hybridizations. Other people did, and he took scions and he grew them here. So we had a shagbark, shellbark hybrid down this way that was a great tree. It was my favorite tree. And then slowly it fell over and isn't there anymore.
Oh, man.
I think I'm seeing a lot of bitternut doing really well.
That's good to know.
Coming up young, coming up in the forest and all that. So that might be something to look at.
Yeah, and that's not something for nut production,
but
could
not
be
at all.
For nobody
diversity.
wants bitter nut. But it could be good for diversity.
And they grow fast, and they're kind of soft. They're not really dense wood. They seem to be fast growers.
Yeah.
So that's one I've noticed a lot. I've not noticed mocker nut, no, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Shagbark and bitter
Pig
nut are the
nut,
most.
no.
Pig nut,
Yeah.
no, right?
Do you think you could make a pecan work in this climate?
Ooh.
No.
Yeah, a couple more years.
He planted some pecans, and they will set fruit, they'll set nuts, but there isn't enough growing degree days. The season isn't long enough to
I see.
mature them.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons, for example, he said this is just not suitable
Right.
for nut production. Not only with those pecans, but with some of the shagbark hickory and so forth. They some years where the warm weather extends well into the fall, they'll fill and there'll be good nut production. But otherwise, they may just, you open them up and the cotyledons are kind of lettucey, watery, and just didn't have time to ripen.
Yeah. So how do you manage this nut grove now, especially as you teach? Like, are you going to plan on doing any more planting in here or experimentation?
Well, you see all these orange flags.
Oh.
These are plants that the class put in. Chad, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess, we're talking about pecans. My philosophy has always been just try it. So you can go and buy seeds from a place like Sheffield's maybe,
Yeah.
or you can go and find them in the woods. And they're easy to, most of these things are really easy to propagate. Pecans are pretty easy too.
Yeah.
So you could make yourself 100 of them pretty easily and then just put them out and give it a shot. These are all elderberries here. We did some a couple varieties of Lonicera. There's
Right back here.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
gooseberries here.
Really well, actually.
A lot of these things will grow in shade or in a little bit of shade, so that's been the challenge, obviously. Let me see what else. We did some herbs, some black cohosh over in the herb garden, sand cherries.
Do you have any issue with like deer here? I mean,
Yeah,
is
well, again, I feel like just give it a shot, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the deer are gonna eat probably a lot of these elderberries, but we might get, 10 or 12 of them. I
Yeah.
think we planted maybe 75.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy to make 75 elderberry.
Yeah.
The deer pressure here is not particularly high, not nearly as high as my backyard.
Yeah.
So, you look for deer tracks along in the snow here, and you won't see all that much. Now, we're going to go down the hill. You can talk about various plantings as you go along.
Sure.
Yeah. And what was your idea with planting some of these? Did you just want to see more layers come through, or just make it a little bit more, diverse and interesting for the classroom, or?
Both. Obviously we were thinking about design, so we wanted to start, or at least in my mind, we wanted to start, some ground layers, some shrub layers, maybe eventually some vine layer, and kind of, work on sort of maximizing the space down here. It's only 4 acres, and, ostensibly, like most homeowners, landowners, got a limited amount of space, so maximizing the amount of space down here and, potentially creating more biodiversity or food production, whatever the case may be.
I think that people, the whole saying of like the best time to plant a tree is yesterday, but you already have like some of the big, tall, like nut layers that people really want when they're thinking about different layers in their forest. And then now your challenge is just doing the smaller herbaceous layers, which,
Right. That's the basis of forest farming, cultivating non-timber forest crops beneath the canopy of an established forest. And these mostly berry plants that Chad is talking about are potential non-timber forest crops.
Right.
One of the things that's essential for shiitake production is shade. You can't grow mushrooms in the full sun, and a really good laying yard place for growing these mushrooms would be underneath conifers. Hemlock would be the absolute best because you'd have shade all year round. It's such a dense shade that you have very little understory. But here we have deciduous trees, nice and shady during the summer and fall, but now it's wide open to the sun, and that's why we put the shade cloth over them to substitute. Okay, basically we're inoculating hardwood logs. So the best species are the oaks, hard maple, and you harvest the tree. You could do it right now or later in the spring, later in the winter, early spring, when the trees are completely dormant, they don't have any leaves on them. You cut the trees down. You have to start with live trees. You can't do this with firewood. Basically, keep them well shaded. We start out by drilling holes into the logs. You can see those along there. And we use spawn, mushroom spawn. We don't make it ourselves. We buy it from a spawn producing company. It's basically a mixture of sawdust with the fungal mycelium growing through it. So we put a plug of that sawdust spawn in each of the holes that we've drilled, and then we cover it over with wax, and that keeps moisture from escaping and keeps other fungi from getting in. Then the log has to sit for about a year, more or less, before it's ready to produce mushrooms. But when it starts producing mushrooms, at the end of that first year, you can get, say, 1.5 pounds of mushrooms per flush, get 2 or 3 flushes per year, and that same log will last for 3 or 4 years. So all told, let's say you're selling these mushrooms at $15 a pound, you're going to make you could make $60 or so per log, and that's a lot more than the value of the firewood, for sure.
Now, are you dunking these in the river at all, or?
Yeah, well, not the river. That's a good point. Is that they will fruit spontaneously, but not predictably. If you're trying to do this on a commercial basis, you want, 20 pounds of mushrooms on Thursday to deliver to your restaurant client, and you can't do that if you just let them fruit naturally. So what you do is force them. You take basically a tank of water, which we don't have here right now, and you soak the logs in the water overnight, bring them out, lean them up against a tree or whatever, and a week later they'll fruit quite predictably. So this way the producer can more or less guarantee he's going to have those 20 pounds of mushrooms on the day that he needs them. And you can soak, one group of logs this week and harvest that, put that stack of logs aside. They have to sit for 7 or 8 weeks before they can be flushed again. And in the meantime, you've got another stack that you're going to flush week 2, and another stack 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And by that time, stack 1 is ready to flush again. So you can just crank through the process 2 or 3 times in a growing season.
Now, are you also doing lion's mane over here?
Yes. Let me cover this back up.
Yep.
These are totems, as we call them. This plastic covering, that it's basically a log that, unlike shiitake logs, which are, say, 4 to 6 inches in diameter, these are 10 to 12 inches in diameter, and they're about that long. And so you put a layer of spawn, that sawdust spawn, on the ground, and then you put one log there, put more sawdust spawn on the top, set a second log on top of that, more sawdust spawn, and then cover it over with either a paper bag or plastic like this. The idea is that the paper bags will deteriorate over the course of the winter, and they'll probably fall apart pretty soon, and that's just fine. You don't want to leave the bags on for too long.
Is this to bring up the humidity, or what?
Well, during the growing season, you keep the humidity up so the log won't dry out, because once again, that's absolutely critical. And it just gets it started. We inoculated these in the fall. If we were to take it apart, pull the large section off, you'd probably see that mycelium has grown and incorporated into the wood. It may be too early for that.
How come these work best on a totem then compared to the shiitake? Is it just their growth structure?
I don't have a good answer for that. It works.
Yeah.
A matter of the log doesn't dry out as fast. Perhaps it has something to do with it. And we can grow, that's the best system for growing shiitake, the bolt, the log like we've seen over there. This is well suited for oyster mushroom, lion's mane, and that's what we have here. So we have oyster, lion's mane, shiitake, and Stropharia, which we'll see over there. So we have 4 different species of mushrooms. There's a good, reliable market for shiitake, but the others, not so much, and I think, the producers have to gradually introduce these to build up a market for some of the alternatives. Our laying yard, as this is called, is pretty small right now, and one of the things I want to do overall is to just have students add to the numbers of logs, so we get back to the couple hundred that we used to have. I've been thinking about organizing a spring log day. People from the community, they love it because they learn how to do this, and then you get logs out of the production.
A log jam, it should be called.
That's a good name for it.
That is a good name. But
the folks get to take one log home,
I know.
And they've inoculated several for us.
This is Sambucus, and actually I think it's the European type, but there's just one of them hidden in the brush down there, and the students just cut, they must have cut 100 pieces off of it and just stuck them right in the ground. And Sambucus allegedly is used in stream bank restoration. I've not seen it personally, but it checks out to me, I guess. So we'll see. We're going to try it out,
I have a lot in my riparian zone.
Yeah.
Does it have like a more fibrous root system, do you know? Or
I don't know. I'm just amazed at how it's growing, and the deer don't really pound it. I mean, they eat it, but it gets up ahead of them.
Yeah.
Just stick them right in the ground. I mean, they're also nice because you can see right here. Sorry, getting sidetracked, but there's a little bud right there.
Yeah.
So it's, it worked.
Sides.
And I mean, this was definitely not high-tech stuff. So that's kind of one of the things we talked about in the class was like, how could you maybe accomplish some of this on a budget?
Well, anybody could do this.
Yes. Right, exactly, yeah. So if you find one elderberry shrub in the woods, you could make, 600 cuttings in half a day. Yeah. Yep. Or, I mean, these pawpaws, right behind us. We're actually walking through a pawpaw grove right now. Yeah, it's all
right here?
Yeah,
Okay.
Swing around to the
You're
front.
gonna go pawpaws next?
But those are easy to propagate. I mean, if you get those seeds and you stratify them correctly, almost every one of them will germinate.
Do you get fruits on these?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
We planted them, 1, 2, I'm looking at the big ones, 3, one over there, 4. We planted maybe a half a dozen of these, and they've grown like gangbusters, but you see we thinned it out in the fall, but there must be 50 or so stems.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is pawpaw suckers up from the roots. So you start with one, and in 5 years you have a small
I know some
planting
people
of them.
recommend to take out the root sprouts.
Well, we've thinned it to maybe less than 50% of what it was.
Okay.
But I want I want a closed canopy here for one thing, and I want enough flowers to do very good pollination. Let me show you some of the flowers here.
Depends on your objective too.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Do you want fruit production,
If you
or
want
do you
fruit
want
or
a
you
hedge
want-
because your neighbors are over there?
That's true. That's true.
See these little brown fuzz balls?
Yeah.
Those are flower buds, and they're quite abundant. This is a vegetative bud, a terminal valvate bud. It doesn't have any bud scars. But anyway, you can see these trees are loaded with flower buds. And in the spring when they bloom, it's this beautiful blood red flower. It's a so-called carrion plant, and the idea is it looks like blood or rotten meat, and flies that like rotten meat will fly to
Does
it
it
and
have a fragrance at
pollinate.
all? I never detected
No,
any.
some carrion plants do, and they
Yeah, but
stink.
these
This
are
one
really
doesn't,
hard to
right,
detect.
but it's
I
got
wonder
the
if flies
color.
can detect it.
I'm sure they
So
can.
what's
if
nice
they-
is they're the only thing out in another month or so, 2
Yeah.
months maybe. Just these dark purple flowers. They're
Yeah.
really-
But with
They are
all these
beautiful.
stems here, you have a lot of pollen, and we get really good pollination. This was the first year that we got really very, very good fruit set. Previous years have been a little less.
And the people on the trail loved it.
It's nice to know that.
Oh,
It's nice to
yeah.
know that people actually
Yes, my fruits.
know what they are.
Some people do.
This particular variety produces black fruit. No, I'm
no,
just
no.
This is Steve has 1 million pawpaws at his house, and he keeps a few of them for Mudge to show off. I don't know
right.
why you keep them.
He said, "Do you have a pawpaw?" Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. It's in the fridge.
And this is a very small pawpaw.
Yeah.
You know, they'll get
Yeah, some of the guys here are like
Like
that,
that,
and
like
some
that,
some of the ones I brought in are like that. They're,
Immense.
it depends on your tree.
And when you
variety.
have this fruit set, do
Yep.
you notice and can you distinguish between the different trees, like what their flavors are? Or is it pretty
Yes.
much the same?
Oh, I can, by looking? No, but you
No,
can cut-
by tasting.
definitely. I mean, because you have one variety here.
they're all seedlings, so they're not a variety at all.
So they all
Yeah,
have
I have
they have all different
three
flavors,
purported
maybe.
varieties, and they're
Okay.
all different. 2 of them are different for sure.
Okay.
You know, there is many.
There's the.
And that's a little. These don't keep well, which is why we don't see
That's right.
these in the market,
That's
right?
They don't
Yeah.
travel well. They
Yeah.
definitely don't keep well. Yeah, it's just not a real popular plant, but people that eat them love them. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're banana flavored, banana custard.
So they can make.
These keep well though. The seeds
Seeds.
keep really well. Yeah, I don't know if
Super
you-
easy to make more of them.
Yeah,
I'll
really.
take those seeds.
They need to be stratified. Okay, and this is from this is the smallest fruit on the tree. That,
You said
Okay.
that was in the refrigerator
Mhm.
for how long?
Well, I had it in my windowsill in my office for 2 months. and then I brought
So
it to
I
the
would need
fridge.
to I would need to stratify them.
Just take them
They're ready to go.
and after
Yeah.
you eat them in the fall,
Yeah.
put them in the refrigerator for about
90
90 days.
Yeah.
Don't
And
eat
then
this. No.
Keep
No, I don't
like
wanna
a
eat
wet
it. Plant 'em
napkin
in.
or something in
Yeah,
I'm
there.
not gonna
you
eat
gotta
that
keep them wet. You have to.
Yeah, you gotta keep them wet.
So I
I
don't
gotta
mind.
keep 'em wet,
I was
okay.
trying them out with fruit
in a
the
bag.
fruit this year.
I don't have a bag on me, but
Yeah.
I could.
No, you don't need them now.
Yeah.
They don't.
The fruit
They're
flesh.
pretty good.
might
I've left them
germinate.
on my desk for a month and so, and then put them in the fridge after.
Yeah.
The fruit
They're very
flesh
hardy.
has actually inhibitors in it to keep the seeds from germinating. So
Oh,
you take them out
interesting.
and you put them in, like, say, sphagnum moss that's
Mm-hmm.
damp, mix them in there and put them in a plastic bag or a jar, put it in the refrigerator for 3 months and take them out and grow more.
But this was sitting on your shelf. This wasn't outside.
Seeds.
These I had in my windowsill just because
Oh, okay.
I brought them into school.
So
and
I
then
still
put 'em
will
in.
need to
These
stratify
are,
these.
No, they're stratified. Then
Oh,
I
they
brought them
are?
into my
Okay.
refrigerator,
Because
so
the
they're
fruit-
weighed.
The flesh was still on there.
Yeah.
So they're real plump. And these
Yeah.
seeds are awesome, and
Yeah.
they came from this super hardy, large fruited tree.
Yeah.
So and they have larger seeds than my other ones.
Do you would
they're
you
prime.
recommend starting these in the house, or would you
Sure.
plant them right in
Yeah,
the?
we're planting some in the greenhouse right now. Did
Okay.
you notice we have a whole
Heat-
table
heat-
full of those?
Yeah, heat mats. I planted some in there too.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah, yes,
heat mats.
the
So
way
our
you
first
usually do,
little-
no tricks. The only thing is that they
Yeah.
shoot down underground first, so that
Yeah,
all the
they-
growth is under.
Right. They
And
they
the
put a
first
big
leaves
tap
are
root.
true leaves, so they just take a lot. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they do it all,
Yeah.
which means you're thinking, oh, they're dead,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you say, oh, what's that? Or worse, you dump them over because you're reclaiming the soil, and there's a bunch of plants in there.
Right.
It's not bad. They're hardy. Doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Ultimately, that is a taproot, and that makes pawpaws particularly difficult to transplant.
Yeah.
Right? So you either grow them from seed. In fact, the ones grown from seed are not varieties. They're just genetically random seedlings.
Yeah.
But if you want cultivars, clones that have been selected for fruit size or ripening or
Taste,
whatever,
yeah.
you have to clone them, and the way you do that is by grafting or chip budding, which is a type of grafting.
I did hear though that people who do let them go to seed, that it doesn't vary that much differently from the parent plants. Like there will be some distinction,
I
but
bet you
the
they're regional,
taste
don't you
is-
think? I mean, you're getting them from different regions of the
Yeah.
country. I would bet.
Yeah.
I'll let you know in another couple of years because I'm
Okay.
starting to get babies that are starting to fruit.
Yeah.
So would we say 7 to 9 years for coming up from that size that Ken described
Right.
till you get fruit? It's great. And then you get more than you can handle. More
Place
than you
to
ever
go
want.
to find out about these is Kentucky State University.
Okay.
There's a guy there named Kurt Stomper, I think, who's done a lot of breeding.
Yeah.
He's made cultivars available all over the East Coast. In fact, at our Lansing orchard, we had a large planting of those cultivars for evaluation purposes. But they're available, and that's one thing that I think we could do with students: have them graft varieties onto some of these rootstocks.
That'd be
These would
fun.
be rootstocks. Yeah.
You can't ever retire. You know that, right? You can fully retire.
Now this is a raised bed, obviously. We've filled it with wood chips. The wood chips were inoculated with that sawdust spawn in the fall, and look what has happened. See this mycelium here? This white mycelium?
I love
That's the
Sophia.
fungus growing out, and it's colonizing this bed of wood chips, and I'm pretty sure next year we're going to get mushrooms. Yeah, you
So
see,
I
look at
planted
that.
these
Look at that.
last year and I lost track of them. So I wonder if this
You
is going to
should
be a
be able
good
to see
year.
that, right?
Yeah, I'm going to have to dig in after the
when
snow.
did you do it? During the
Spring of last year.
spring?
Spring. So yeah, I don't know.
late spring? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sometimes people
late
get them
spring,
in the same season.
May.
They say, yeah.
I think we planted them in May. I thought we were going to get them in the fall because we had such a rainy.
I know it could be, but
And I planted them in New York City in our little community garden. They told me not to plant them because people are scared of mushrooms.
yeah, I know. I
Oh,
know.
And
yeah,
then we
yeah.
planted them, and there were like hundreds of stropharia. And people are like, what is this? But all the kids loved it.
They're beautiful.
And they taste so good. They taste like a cross between a potato and a walnut. That's how,
Oh, never heard
with
it
like
described
the texture of a portobello.
Ooh, I like that.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes I describe the taste of a pawpaw as a cross between banana and oyster, but
Banana and oyster.
Custard, banana custard.
Okay,
It nails
banana
it
custard.
perfectly. Huh?
anyway, we'll get a crop, presumably a crop of mushrooms here, but they'll also start sprouting up there and there and there. They
Yeah.
really move around fast.
Okay.
You know,
You
they'll
can move them
colonize
around,
your
so we
garden.
can take that handful
Just take that and throw it
then
somewhere.
put it
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Some people just put them all over their beds, all over.
Yeah,
the,
garden
all over
beds
Yep.
and yeah, flower beds.
Can one of you tall people,
Not a bud?
pull that branch. Watch your hand.
You watch me.
Okay, so let's imagine we cut it off right there. This is our scion, and actually we'd use only first-year wood. We would make a slice there, a slice about ½ an inch beside it, and then in the spring we can peel it back because the bark is slipping. Then we take our scion, and you know, the key to grafting is match the cambium of the stalk and scion. Well, the cambium, it's actually green here, you can see it, all right? When you lay it up against the cut that you've made here, the same diameter, you're putting contact between the stalk and the cambium of the stalk and scion. Then we put that flap of bark back up there and use a little tiny tack and nail it into place. If within several weeks, it'll start to grow. Hickory is normally grown in full sun. I mean, you know, this was completely deforested when he started grafting these things. But because this one is growing beneath the canopy, it's growing very, very slowly. It would probably be at least twice its diameter by now, except for the fact that it's growing in the shade.
What made this form this crotch? This Y?
We allowed 2 buds. There's a bud, and there's a bud. So if you let both grow, that's fine, but I should have taken one out. You know, this is a narrow crotch. It's prone to breaking out. So if I was really rigorous about it, I would have taken the weaker of the 2 out. The terminal bud of shagbark hickory is really distinctive, large, very large.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
It reminds me a little bit of a less fuzzy magnolia, you know, because they have those really
big. Or some of the rhododendrons have giant buds. Here's here's another recently grafted hickory.
Yeah, I'm getting all the.
Yeah, big boys.
Yeah.
This is a cultivar, Thomas Black Walnut, and it's very prolific producer. Has larger, typically larger seeds than the wild one.
Black walnut. This is black walnut, and it's very peppery smelling. This one, you want to give it a smell?
That fragrance bothers me a little bit. It's a little bit too.
Oh yeah, too much.
Yeah.
So black walnut. Have you found it that nothing else grows around it, or with the juglone? You don't think it's true?
There are a few things that are inhibited by walnut toxicity, juglone, but most things are not. If you look at the Arnold Arboretum, has a list of things that are compatible with black walnut. It's practically everything you've ever seen. We're talking about, like I say, black cohosh, hostas, certain ferns, and some other shade-loving plants that people buy up and put in their shade garden. We use a system. We don't just plant them in the soil, because you dig them up, you lose half the roots and so forth and everything. So we use a system called pot in pot. Dig a hole, put an empty pot right down flush with the ground, and then you take your pot that's got growing medium in and your black cohosh or whatever, set it right in there, and that, because the pot with the root system is down below the soil level, it's insulated from winter cold.
Right.
So it'll survive the winter much more effectively. And in the summer, it's cooler than growing it in the soil. Then when you're ready to go, you just pick it up and you got the pot and you take it to the market.
It sounds very similar to what they do in botanic gardens, where they will sink, they call it sinking, and they'll sink a pot. Say there's a plant that can't be top-down watered, for instance. They'll put it in sand and they'll water the sand around it, and so it's like a sunken pot. This one is a great tip, especially like figuring out where they all are, and you could just take them out and put another one in.
Yes, exactly.
I'd imagine, I wonder if golden seal, because that's another thing that's been over harvested. I wonder if that's something that you could do.
We have a little here, and it's never performed very well. But if we took better care of it, like in a pot and pot situation, it might grow.
We commit 10% of our Google AdSense proceeds back into the Finger Lakes community. So consider that when you watch this channel, as you're helping the community here flourish. Now, if you find yourself coming back to these videos, then we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications button so you stay in the know with the latest videos. Thanks again for being a supporter, and we'll see you in the next video.